All right, everybody. So again, I'm Teresa Hebron. I'm the digital metadata librarian here at Mountain West, and I'm going to give you a little systems and metadata overview. Just as a brief introduction for myself, so I've been a librarian about 10 years now and spent 9 of the last 10 years working at a major ILS vendor on the West Coast that I will not name. But so I come to this position with a wealth of systems experience, and I actually feel a little bit of a fraud standing here in front of so many people who know so much about digital libraries and digital metadata, and I feel like I have to catch up a little bit. So I appreciate what Kinza said about all of you being a network and a resource for us, because we couldn't do it without everyone here. And another thing I always say, why I was interested in this position, why I came here was during library school, I worked at the campus archives at University of Michigan and had the pleasure of both processing collections, describing collections, but also working in reference. So I have a bit of a holistic overview of how special collections and archives go. But as I was putting this presentation together in the last couple of weeks, the thing that I really thought back to was a project I actually worked on as an undergraduate student when I was at Indiana University. They have the American Indian Studies Research Institute there, and part of that is a Center for Documentation of Endangered Languages. So I was cutting sound samples from field research that graduate students and professors had done with Native American languages, both in Oklahoma and in the Dakotas. So when I say that I have an appreciation for how much groundwork goes into any of these kind of digital projects, I would go into the lab and I would sit there, and I had a script that I was working from. So the graduate students had gone out to reservations, and they were working with some of the last native speakers of some of these languages to preserve their language, and then we were reworking it into online dictionaries, which this is a picture of, but also educational instructional series to be used so that Native American tribes can preserve their languages. So I would sit in there and listen to the script and cut tiny little bits out of this whole long sound file, and some of these had even been digitized from wax scrolls, so going back a long way. So when I send back feedback to folks about collections, I appreciate how many layers of work and how much time goes into these things. So that's enough about me. Kinza gave a little overview already of Mountain West and its membership, but I count 16 hubs instead of 17 somehow.
It's because of the two.
The recontributed, okay.
Have always been counted.
Okay. So 16, 17, but that's representing 85 partners in 6 states. This is the map that we have on the Mountain West website. So we have folks all over the West. This is even close to all of the individual partners that we have, including Hawaii way down in the corner. I had to zoom way out to get it there on the screen. You may not even be able to see it at the bottom. And if we look at our current content profile, meaning how many records we have, numbers aren't everything, and I think one of the themes that we're hearing throughout the day and we heard yesterday is what is the impact of these collections. But speaking in pure numbers, we're sitting at just below 1 million records right now total, 982,000, and of those, about 98% of them have been recontributed to DPLA. So we're very well represented in DPLA, and sometimes folks ask, well, why isn't it 100% of the collections that are in there? There are a few exceptions that we leave out, most notably theses and dissertations. They don't really want finding aids because it's not a direct link to a cultural heritage object. And then there's a few collections where rights were unclear. For example, I'm thinking of one that I worked on this spring for DHA, for the Department of Heritage and Arts, where the collection manager there just said, I'm not really sure why we have this collection, so let's put it in Mountain West, but for now let's keep it out of DPLA because we're not sure where it came from or why we have it. So that accounts for the difference. Then if we look by hub, so all of the different content partners that are hosting content, this is roughly the breakdown across the entire network. So I'm sorry, this is so tiny at the front here, but roughly half of the records that we have are hosted by Marriott Library. They have a ton of partners, so that's not surprising. And then especially this spring, we've been adding tons of content as well from Oregon Digital, so they're this bright green slice that we see up at about 2 o'clock on the pie chart there. Comparing historically, so I started just in January, so I don't have numbers going back a long way, even though they probably are somewhere and I haven't found them yet. This is the totals that we had at the beginning of the year. So we've added over 200,000 records actually since I got here, and that's thanks to all the hard work that all of you have been doing. I know I'm at the top of the very pyramid. It's sitting on a wide range of partners that are doing things over a vast amount of area. So I really appreciate that. So thank you for submitting all the collections that you have submitted. And again, just breaking down my numbers, that is about 98% again being contributed to DPLA. And we had the first DPLA harvest of Mountain West in a couple of years this spring. So that was a pretty exciting milestone to pass as well. If we look at where we're sitting relative to other DPLA members, we're actually the 8th largest contributor. So that may not sound very impressive, but I had to cut off the screen here because it scrolled so far down. And if you look at the partners that we're next to, we're actually in very good company. We're like just a little bit behind California Digital Library, which is a massive operation. I think they have many more staff than we do. And also just behind Portal to Texas History. So again, thank you. And that's a lot of work going into all of that. In terms of the collections that we have, right now, by my maybe not so scientific count, we have about 700 active collections, and that's spanning a wide range of content. So Mackenzie was saying, we have so many different things, but this is just a snapshot briefly of the kinds of things that we have in Mountain West, but we're always interested in getting other kinds of content if we have things that we may need to account for. Oh, I was going to ask, does anyone want to hazard a guess how many average items a collection in Mountain West has?
1,000.
How many?
1,000.
More.
Okay.
More. We had 1,000 over here. I feel like an auctioneer.
Yeah, I know. 2,500?
More.
Okay.
Is that skewed by some institutions having collections that
They're
are like
extremely large.
very, very big?
Possibly, yes. So it's actually, when I looked the other day, it's actually almost 11,000. So, but just know we have collections that range from one single item as a compound object that might be 50 pages in one item. I know Gina is the queen of compound objects. But we also have collections that are 70,000 records, for example. So they range very widely in size. So that's an interesting point, I think. So this spring we've actually added, well, as I said, we've added a number of collections, but we've gotten content from many, many of the members. We've had things added from 12 of 16, well, my count 16 of the hubs, so that's 75%. And we also welcomed our newest member, which is Oregon Digital, this spring. So a huge thanks to you guys for being here and for all the content. That's amazing. So you're probably thinking at this point, or you might be thinking, well, we have all this content. How does it get into Mountain West? And the answer, in a nutshell, is OAI PMH. So if you're not familiar with what OAI PMH is, and again, look at your bingo cards. That is a really fancy long acronym that does not really trip off the tongue for Open Archives Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting. You're probably thinking, well, what is that? So OAI PMH came out of not actually the library and archives community, is my understanding, but rather from the research community, more broadly, the academic research community, quite a while ago, back in the 90s, as a way of exchanging data in a standardized XML format. But the way I always think of it is like a knock-knock joke, right? So, you go to a door, you say, knock, knock, and you guys say?
There.
Okay. So XML, or OAI PMH, does the same thing. A service provider, in our case, Mountain West, says, give me data. And the repository, so all of your repositories, know how to respond to that query and says, here's your data that you want, and it's in a certain format. If you incorrectly format your query, or if there is no data that matches it, the repository will say, I don't know what you want, or there's an error. So it's a pretty black and white situation. You either get your data or you don't. But how we use that OAI stream from your different repositories basically two ways. We audit the data that's coming in, and then we also use it to harvest. So OAI PMH is the backbone of harvesting for Mountain West and for many repositories across the GLAM space. So there's 6 requests of verbs, so 6 knock-knock jokes, I guess you could say, in OAI. And here they are, but really, when we get down to it, Mountain West only uses about 3 of those at a time. And that's identify, list records, and list sets. So the way this works is the OAI harvesting uses the base, what's called the base URL of your repository, and then those verbs from OAI to get information, to make a request. So as an example, I'm going to jump over to the Marriott Libraries repository here. So this is a request to identify. So knock knock, who are you? The library will respond, here I am. So this might look like nonsense. It's nicely formatted because it's in, at least has color coding here. But basically it responds with the name of the repository, its base URL, as I was just saying, which is the most simple URL that you then add on your OAI verbs to get your data back. And some other identification information. So the first step of harvesting is always, hey, identify yourself. Are you there? Is anyone listening? So as I was saying, the one piece that it pulls out is the base URL, and that's listed in these tags. And then further, list sets is used to show the data for the collections that are hosted on a certain repository. So when OAI was developed, it was, it's possible that there are institutions or types of data that aren't grouped into sets like this, but libraries and archives group things into collections, and I think we know that. So similarly, this is reflected in the digital world with this list sets command. And again, to show that here. This is a pretty simple overview of all the different collections that are available for harvesting in this particular repository. So list sets, and then within each of these brackets here that say set, it gives the name on the repository side, and then the human readable name. So for example, Utah State Archives Colorado Riverbed case is one particular group of records within its repository. And then finally, list records. So to say list records without any parameters on it would just give you all of the records that are available. And so, for example, if we were to do that to Marriott, we'd probably be here all day because they have many, many, many records. It's also very labor intensive. So the list records command, we break it down by metadata format, and then also a particular set to say, give us this data right here. We don't want all the data, we just want this particular set of data. And that is actually the command that Mountain West runs when it's harvesting data from your repositories. So if we pop out and look at that, scroll just a tiny bit. Maybe I'll scroll a tiny bit, maybe not. Okay, so starting here is one record, the header that identifies that record, and then the actual metadata of it down here that's just cut off at the very bottom of the screen. So this is one item within the repository within this set. So you're probably looking at this and you're thinking, who could remember to do all of this stuff, right? And if you don't work with that every day, I make typos all the time. And to make it a little easier with the auditing, that brings us to the next use of our OAI, which is auditing. And I have to give full credit here to first the North Carolina Digital Heritage Center, because they coded a tool that they then shared on GitHub in 2014 that uses the OAI stream from your various repositories to check data against a certain standard. So in their case, they were using it to check their incoming data against the standard that DPLA was asking for, to make sure that they were getting the required metadata from their collections to pass on to DPLA. But the previous Mountain West director, Sandra McIntyre, actually took that tool, got it off GitHub, and recoded it to work with the Mountain West metadata application profile. So when we're checking your metadata, when you say, hey, we have a collection that's ready to harvest, this is one of the things that we do to check it. So It has 3 features. It has a mapping checker, a required data checker, and a facet viewer. So it's easiest just to show these, and I'll do that here briefly. All right. So the mapping checker is making sure that the fields that we ask for in the metadata application profile are matched to the correct fields in your repository. So for example, a title is with title, and that type is with type. So if I can, I'm going to use again, the Marriott Library base URL here. One note, it does require you to put in the protocol, the HTTP or HTTPS. If you don't, it just doesn't work. I should probably put a note here that says that. And then we do gift sets. Did I use the right base URL? No. Oh, because I need the OAI part. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Just look on one of your tabs.
All right, and so we get a list of the sets that I was talking about earlier, both by their set name and then by their full human readable name. And I'm going to demonstrate with this artifact collection because it's just very small. It just has 4 objects in it. And it returns this lovely table with bright yellow highlighting for the table headers for the required fields. And then if we scroll over to the right, the recommended fields, and then just extra fields that you may have mapped. So, for example, publisher, relation, language is hanging out way over here on the right, and I should probably move it. But this is a nice tool because it gives a visual overview of the data that's going to be returned. It's sort of a what you see, what you get kind of presentation of data from your repository and how it will be reflected in Mountain West. So for example, sometimes we get a collection where the description fields are extremely long because, for example, OCR data has been mapped from the description field. And we usually say, maybe cut that down or unmap that because the interface that Mountain West uses can only display about 100 characters from the description, so there's no really reason to have a giant, full text description. So, go back to the home page. The required data checker is what it sounds like. It checks that the fields that are required by the application profile are in the set that we're testing. And again, I'll use the artifact collection as our example here. So again, if we had any missing fields, it would return the name of that field in this first column here. So say we were missing title, it would print title. And we can see for this collection that language was not provided in any of the records, but it looks like one was missing coverage data, but the others had it. And if you wanted to pop out and either look at either one of these records, these are all links here. But then this is the same list records query that I demonstrated at the beginning, showing the entire set here, as we saw before. Or if you wanted to see just one single record, this is building using the get record command that I mentioned earlier. This is really the only time I look at this or use it, is to do one single record like this out of the collection. So then finally, this is a feature that was not originally provided in the original Mountain West adaptation of this tool, and I'm not sure why that is, because I kind of like it, and I think Gina likes it. You said you did, so I'll pick on you. Oh my goodness, my typing. So what this does is it gives us an opportunity to look at the data in particular fields. So for example, if you have a collection where you're applying sort of blanket subject headings, you could look at your subjects and say, okay, well, what did I do here? And this is a way of catching, for example, misspellings or variations in subject headings that have been used. I've done this on a couple collections that I've described myself and thought, what was I doing, and gone back and fixed things. But it's also a way, this is something that we have Keegan use when he's doing blog posts about our new collections, to sort of get a sense of keywords that he can use to describe new collections in our blog posts. For example, what is this collection really about? So I guess the gist of all this is, this tool takes the guesswork out of doing auditing. It's publicly available, so folks can use it before they submit collections to us, but this is also what we use to do most of our metadata auditing. All right, so just to give an overview of how the harvesting workflow goes, we have a forum on our public website, MWDL.org, and we ask you a few questions about your collection. For example, what is its name? What is its set? Basically, how do we get it? How do we find it? Do we have rights to reharvest it? Are you okay with us sharing it with DPLA? That goes into a spreadsheet that emails Kins and I both that a new collection has come in. And from there, we undertake the audit. And one of the outcomes from last year's MWDL summer meeting was that folks wanted more transparent audit feedback. So a previous staffer came up with a system of creating Google Sheets to provide the auditing feedback to folks. And so far that's been working really well. If it's not, please let me know, but I haven't heard otherwise. So once auditing and remediation is complete, so for example, if we audit the collection, we find out that you're missing description data in all your records, we'll put that in the spreadsheet and I'll email you and say, hey, you need to fix up these records. The great thing about having the public tool is you can get that item by item feedback, so it's very easy to target those records and go back and fix them if you have to. But from there, once everything is remediated and looking good, we go ahead and harvest it into Mountain West production. And then from there, it goes into DPLA in a quarterly harvest. So just as a visual overview of the workflow, I know it's kind of hard to keep all of that in your head. This is just one example from one hub. For example, we have all of their partners. They feed their data into the hub. Via OAI, it goes to Mountain West. If there is anything that needs to be remediated, we have a feedback loop going to that hub to get that stuff fixed. And then from there, contributed onto DPLA, not via OAI, actually, via X services, which is another data exchange protocol that is, I believe, proprietary from Ex Libris, which is going to bring me to my next point here. And again, DPLA does their own auditing and lets us know, hey, you have fields missing, you have this missing, you need to fix things. When things are looking good, they go ahead and do the ingest. So that brings me to 2 points. We had a question yesterday about the outgrowth of some task force work, which brings me to the metadata application profile. So the last time it was revised was in July of 2011. Since then, lots of things have happened. We've had a complete staff changeover. The DPLA metadata application profile just came out with the most recent version in December of 2017, and that was version 5.0. Our map is currently paired with their 3.0 version, so we've skipped over a couple, and we need to maybe look again at how we're doing things. So after this meeting is over, we're going to be putting out a call to start a task force. I know some of you have already expressed interest to doing work on that, to begin revising our map and seeing what we need to do going forwards. And I also want to put in a brief plug for, I'm also working on a task force that's part of one of the DLF metadata working groups. We've been working to compile a clearinghouse, a public clearinghouse of different maps and different metadata documents. So I'll just show that really briefly here. It's available to everyone. And we have contributions from institutions all over the country here right now. So if you want to contribute something, there's directions on this page to contribute, and there's also documents that you can compare and look at your local institutions if you're looking to write application profiles or maybe clean up metadata stuff. So, all right. So to the systems part of things, As you probably know, Mountain West is built on Ex Libris Primo, and it actually has a newer skin available. So Marriott Library launched this skin this spring, I believe in May. So their USearch portal is actually on that new skin if you wanted to take a look at it in more depth. But the graphic designer for Marriott Library was nice enough to do a little mock-up for us so that we could see what Mountain West would look like in that. And I can show that now. It has a few notable differences. So this is our main page here. And my favorite search is for Shasta, because there's cool pictures of a liger that used to be at the zoo here. So I think the most notable thing is it just has a much cleaner look and feel overall. So the facets are here on the left-hand side as they are now, although this particular skin has the option of switching them to the right-hand side, and that was what Marriott Library chose to do after, I think, doing some focus groups with students. I would prefer to keep them on the left, but we haven't made any decisions about that yet. And I'm going to grab this and hop over to Chrome here so I can show you the mobile interface. This, to me, is the most exciting part of this. So with the developer tools in Chrome, you can switch between a desktop view and a mobile view. So it's this toggle button here. I don't know if you've ever tried to access Mountain West on a mobile device, especially a phone. The current interface does not offer really any kind of mobile view. I have some screenshots that I'll show in a minute. It just looks smaller, and as you know, it already has a lot of data on the page, so it's pretty hard to see. But this actually looks pretty nice. And if we go into a single record here, it's a lot more friendly and a lot more modern looking. So I think this is pretty exciting. So going back to the full desktop view here, we'll close the developer tools. One of the main differences, or another main difference is, it only shows thumbnails now, and that's in the browse display. When you go into a full record display, it again shows the thumbnail, but right now Mountain West offers that preview screen that's in the, I forget what it's even called. Anyway, it basically shows a preview of the resource back in your local database. And it doesn't look that great because it's just a miniaturized version, for example, of Content DM or whatever system you have. So it's a lot of stuff in a smaller window that's a little cluttered looking. So we lose that feature, but you still always have the option to just go directly to the resource from that particular page.
Does that look like an embedded pane within the window?
Right, right, the original, yeah. So it, yeah. Okay. All right, so we haven't made a decision to switch over yet or any timeline on that. The one unfortunate drawback of this new skin is it will change the permanent URL. Permanent, I use the word in quotes because apparently nothing is ever permanent. For all of the Mountain West records, and what that means is what we contribute to DPLA will also change. And so I don't think they're fully ready and have not processed the trauma yet, even of having to change all their links from even the Marriott Library switchover, so I can't spring this on them just yet. And it's something we do need to consider going forward if we want to do that. So yeah, just this is the current website, and then that's what it looks like with the developer mobile view. So, and this is, I don't know, iPhone 6, 7, not very friendly. All right, so final thing about systems, as I said, Mountain West is built on Primo. Right now, Marriott Library, who is our host institution, is undergoing an ILS RFP, and apparently Ex Libris is here today presenting, I just learned. So we had presentations earlier this spring from, I believe, 6 vendors, and 3 of them have been chosen to give more in-depth presentations, of which Ex Libris is one. And that's really all we know at this time. So while there is the possibility that we might have to switch platforms, I kind of feel it's unlikely, and really we'll have more information as we know it, probably later on this year. Okay, so finally, I know we talked about Keegan a little bit earlier. He started with us in late February. He's my metadata assistant, and he couldn't be with us here today because he is in Kyrgyzstan. He got a 3-month scholarship to study there. He's doing Russian studies as his minor. And I was thinking just the other day, man, I haven't heard from him in a couple months. I hope he hasn't been kidnapped or I don't know. And then literally like the next day, he sent me an email. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it. He said, "I hope summer is going well at MWDL. It's in full force here. The weather changes by the hour, but rarely drops below 90. I'm in Bishkek, which is the capital, for the next 3 weeks before we head out on a main journey on horseback. My Russian skills are increasing rapidly. A couple other things I've learned. Kyrgyz food doesn't generally use spices, so they're really difficult to find. Fermented mare's milk is not an acquired taste." So he's due back in mid-August, and I can't wait to have him back because honestly, he's doing a lot of the grunt work with metadata auditing, but also all the blog posts that you've been seeing have mostly been his writing. So I can't wait to have him back. All right, so that brings me to the end of my presentation, and if anyone had any questions, you know where to find me. I'm right here right now.